Hi, my name is Trenton Bennett, and today I'm talking to Benjamin R. Smith, playwright and author of June Cleaver, Sexual Deviant. Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Trenton. Happy to be here.
Good deal. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. What inspired
Well,
you to become a playwright?
I'm from Wichita, Kansas originally, and I went to school in Kansas. Basically, spent most of my life in Kansas, and inspired to become a playwright is kind of an awkward thing. I don't think I was really inspired to do it. It just sort of happened. I was at the University of Kansas, and I was studying journalism, and I loved interviewing people, and I loved meeting people, and eventually I got to the point where I was enjoying journalism and conversations with people, and I just started sitting down and having conversations with myself in my head, and eventually I started writing them down, and then someone said, "Hey, you can do this. It's called screenwriting or playwriting." So I looked into classes, and I ended up with a master's of fine arts in playwriting. I don't know. I've always loved conversations and witty banter. I mean, I grew up watching TV. I loved sitcoms and all that stuff. So that's kind of how I guess I fell in love with dialogue and back and forth and one-liners. And I don't know. It was just sort of attractive to me to kind of think of how people can communicate and get along and solve problems together as a group. Playwriting actually affords a playwright has something different from just a regular author. Like most authors, they like to, they like to work on things by themselves for a while before they show them to people. And playwrights, it's different. You have to kind of sit down and be like, you either sit down with a producer or a director or a cast of people and you say, okay, is this working? And you get feedback and you kind of get sort of a communal thing going. And I love that about playwriting over just being a guy who writes novels.
So when you're writing something, are you thinking about it in visual terms, or is it just is it one of those things where you can't wait to see what it's going to look like when you have someone act it out?
Well, it evolves. Usually when I start writing a play, I start out with a character by themselves. Usually I start with one character. The thing about that character is you kind of like have them monologue for a bit, or I write monologues out freehand. And I'm like, okay, so this person actually has a soul. That's the first thing I have to establish with the characters. Do they have kind of like a soul or a bee in their bonnet? Or is there something that's motivating them, something that makes them real? And the moment I discovered that, okay, now they need someone to talk to. And I remember when I was I was probably about 20, I started writing a book. And I never finished it, but the premise was, it was the devil talking about how God created him. And it's like, okay, basically God was alone for a long, 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 long time. And eventually God said, well, maybe I should create something else beside me. And he thought about that for a long time. And he said, well, I could create a best friend, but I don't want anybody who just agrees with me. And so the devil's like, and so he created his mortal enemy because that's more interesting. So, and that was kind of how it is like you create a character that you kind of like. And I don't want to say love. You create a character that you kind of like. And the thing, you should never, ever love any of your characters very much because you have to eventually torture the crap out of them. So if you love them, it's hard to do. You create a main character that you kind of get along with or you kind of understand. And then you have to create their antithesis, or you have to create, if not their antithesis, you have to create someone they have to explain themselves to. So a student, I guess. And that's kind of where the first conversation has to come from. Either it has to be an argument or they have to be explaining something like, okay, you're new. This is how I am. Or you're wrong. This is how you're wrong. And they have to defend themselves or they have to educate someone about themselves or about their stance on something. So those are kind of the ways I start plays. You're either arguing with someone or you're trying to teach them.
Do you feel like in June Cleaver, Sexual Deviant, that maybe Theo is that particular role?
Yes, but she wasn't the first person I created after June. The first person I created was Ward after June, and it was because she had to argue with someone, and it was the scene where she and Ward they've met, and he's sitting next to her, and they have to discuss the old "why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free" thing, and Ward's like, that's a stupid saying. I don't like my mother always said why buy the cow when you can get the milk for less free? And he's like, I've never met your mother, but I have a feeling I wouldn't like her because that's a stupid thing to say. And so it becomes this philosophical argument about you're not a cow, you're a human being. And if I did have to buy, I mean, if I was getting milk, I'd pay for the milk, not the cow. We have stores. We have people who deliver milk to our houses now. What the hell's going on? Why is this still a saying? And I remember when I was writing this play, I started writing this play when I was about 21, and it was one of those. I had a girlfriend. She was very nice. I love her very much, but she was also very cloistered growing up. She didn't want to engage in that kind of stuff. So I was kind of frustrated as a young man because I liked this girl. I got along with her well, but everyone else in college was having sex. I wasn't. So it became one of those, okay, I have to figure out. It was one of those, I had this argument in my mind about, why buy the cow when you get the milk for free? And it was sort of like this argument was sort of a stand-in for my actual relationship at the time. And I basically took Ward's side in that argument. And Ward ends up winning that argument because at least he did. And it was just, it ended up being one of those out of sexual frustration. And I still respect the woman and her choices and all that stuff in that situation, but at least he got to vent. Ward got to vent for me. So that was the first argument I wrote. And now Theo, she came along because I didn't want to write the same old sitcom, June Cleaver from 1950, and it was mostly because I had a grandmother who had been a mom in the 1950s, had her first kid in 1955, and she was one of those. She was very opinionated and sassy, and I could not imagine that woman, as I knew her from being born in 1985 until she died in 2008. She was just this very opinionated, wonderfully colorful. I mean, she was a good cook, but at the same time, she was just this person that I could never imagine being the perfect 50s housewife. She seemed to be the kind of person that would have, rousted my granddad and kicked him in the butt. They were the couple that they'd been married for 50 years. They were married for over 50 years. And they were the most wonderful people to watch just sit and tease and argue with each other. I mean, it was one of those, I don't know what it was about their relationship. They loved each other dearly, but it was like watching like Andy Capp and his wife. They were just perfect, or they were like the honeymooners. I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and this is a town where George Tiller, he was a doctor who ran a clinic here. He was killed about a year before that play was done. And the play is a comedy, but it deals with the pro-life, pro-choice debate a little bit. And this was a doctor who performed abortions at a clinic here in Wichita, and he was killed by pro-life. I guess I'm trying to think of the term that fanatics is the term I'm trying to avoid, but he was a pro-life fanatic. And it's one of those, this debate in Kansas. I mean, if you ever drive through Kansas, I don't know if you ever have, but you will go through Kansas and you will drive down the highway, and you can't go more than 5 or 10 miles without seeing some farmer or some rancher with a sign in his field next to the highway saying, "Choose life. Abortion is murder." It's a charged topic here. And it's one of those, like, I grew up and it was just one of those, in my family, we didn't talk about it because it wasn't a big deal. And it's one of those, the women in my family are mostly very educated. I had an aunt who went to MIT. My mother has 2 degrees. My father, he has 2 degrees. They were very strong about me going to college. I ended up with 4 degrees. And it was one of those, we always had this respect of a woman's intelligence and a woman's kind of rights to be who she wants to be. And if that involved, I had a brother growing up. I never had sisters, but I know that if I had a sister who ended up in a situation where she was about to become a mother without being prepared, the family would have been like, if you're not ready, you're not ready. And they would have supported it. They would have supported, if you're not ready, you're not ready. Okay. Better to be ready, prepared, than not. I think that was my family's sort of stance on it. And it was growing up in this environment where every farm field had abortion as murder. I felt that was like this little pocket of don't feel the pressure, be your own person, and that was why I kind of wrote the play from that idea that you can take a breather and not feel the pressure of the community.
You bring that out really well in the exchange between Theo and June, where she's, on the one hand, she is the TV mom from Leave It to Beaver, where they would not have had a pregnancy on the show.
Yeah,
but on the other hand, there's that reality of her going, okay, well, I already have a plan for this because this is a thing that all we women know that we need to do if this happens.
Yeah. And again, some of my favorite exchanges are between June and Ward when they're younger, because June, like when June informs Ward that she's pregnant, it's one of those like, it's just, a tidbit. As he's out the door, it's like, okay, I'm pregnant, bye. And it's like, and he comes back, he's like, whoa, what? You're pregnant? You're telling me this? And it was one of those situations where I did write it for comedy, but at the same time, I don't know. I have a son. He's 6, and his mom and I, we had a very short kind of relationship. And it's one of those, every once in a while, I write something, and then I don't know if it's just sort of like, it's probably me, but I'll write something, and about a year or two later, I'll meet my character. I'll meet the person that I wrote. And it's kind of, I don't want to say it's clairvoyance or kind of that, but it's one of those, I'll meet someone who reminds me of someone I wrote. And that was June, young June. I ended up meeting her and having a kid with her. And how should I put it? She's a very unique woman who I do not get along with. And it's like, but I respect her boundaries, and I respect her as a mom. She is a really great mom, but it's one of those, again, that respect of a woman's independence and being her own person. Eventually it was one of those, like, after her, I kind of had the epiphany, maybe I should just be dad and she should just be mom, and we shouldn't be a couple. And it's working out fine. But it was one of those, that epiphany, like, she's dealing with her stuff, I'm dealing with my stuff. And that's something I miss, I think, from the 1950s, is the idea that you're a couple dealing with things together, teaching the kids together. I'm not saying that this doesn't work as well, but it's one of those, I don't know, you kind of feel like you're on your own now, as opposed to, at the end of the day, at least I can vent to Ward, or at the end of the day, at least June's there to hold me.
Do you feel like Ward and June, as the older couple,
we're
still
weathering
have...
the world together? I feel...
Whoops, I had a little dropout. Sorry about that. Are you still there?
Ward and June, the older couple, still...
I'll reset real quick.
1 2 1 2.
Do you feel like Ward and June as a couple still... Oh, gosh, I guess we're getting the network thing again.
Oh, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Bear with me. Take 2.
Okay.
Do you feel that the older Ward and June as a couple also kind of had each other's backs, or do you feel like they'd kind of gone their own way by that point?
That's a question that, you ask a question, and it's like, I feel that they are comfortable with each other. They have gotten used to each other. and they're like, I don't know, they're like shoes that didn't quite match at the beginning, but now they are so worn and they've been together for so long that they look the same. And there is love with them. They do love each other. I think June loves Ward. And even though he's not the person that she imagined herself being with forever, he became this sort of like, he's there and he sticks with it. That's something to appreciate. So it's kind of like, even though he in the later scenes when they're in a later life, he's suffering with senility a little bit, and June's there to kind of like, Ward, you're going off the rails a little bit, come back. And she does that because eventually, for every 10 days you have to deal with someone who's dealing with senility or Alzheimer's or are kind of lapsing there at the end of life. For every 10 days you have to go through that. There's this one day where they wake up and they remember everything, and it makes you cry just to have them be there, for one day. And sorry, I've dealt with this with some people, and it's just a beautiful kind of moment. So
I completely understand. I've been through this with my grandfather, and I'm currently going through it with my grandmother. Believe me.
Yeah.
I get it.
You get that one day. It was like, oh, it's like a day in the park, they're back. Yeah. So, or they say something, it's like, wow, that was wisdom. You feel like you can take that and put it in your pocket. So anyway, sorry, I get emotional. I think about that.
Believe me, I do. We were talking yesterday about my grandmother because I can talk to her, I can give her a call, and the moment I hang up the phone, I'm no longer there, and she'll say, gosh, I really wish he'd call me. And so then I think to myself, and then there are so many times during her day, she may say, I wish he'd call me, and won't remember whether I have or not. So I could say, well, I'm only going to talk to her if it's for me. But the truth is, that is a beautiful thing if you can do it. Sometimes you find exactly that right trigger and the memories come through and there they are. And they give you that wisdom. It's
Yeah. And there's also that moment, you go and you visit people and they think you're like, for instance, my dad and I have, I look like my dad did 30 years ago. So my dad and I would go and visit a relative who had dementia, and she'd talk to me as if I was my dad. And it was one of those, I got none of the references, and my dad would be there, kind of being like, who's this older gentleman with you? Who's your friend? And I was like, well, this is the person you think I am, and I'm his son. And it wouldn't kind of it confused them, or it wouldn't register. And eventually, and then there were times when you go in and they'd talk to my dad. And it's like, oh, hi, Kelly. And I was like, oh, thank God. I don't have to pretend to be someone. I don't have to pretend to be my dad when he was 30, when he was 30, so, it's like, I don't know. It's like a window of opportunity where you get to like, oh, the veil's lifted. Something's going right today. They're having a good day,
on the one hand, when you use Ward for comedic effect, like he's standing up and he's making paper hats off to the side while all this conversation is going on, that's a good humorous use of that kind of senility. But I really did feel like you treated the idea of his impending dementia respectfully. And I think I really appreciated that reading it.
I was worried, and that's the thing, I was worried about it doing that because I don't want to make fun of it, but at the same time, if you've dealt with someone who has dementia, it's hard. It's hard not to have. There are times when it's like you have to laugh at it. If you don't laugh, it's tragic. I mean, it's a tragic circumstance, but it does eventually, it does sometimes accidentally lend humor because it's like, you know, you don't want to make fun of it, but at the same time, it's like sometimes you get a good belly laugh out of tragedy. And it's not that you're making fun of the person. It's not that you don't pity. You don't. I don't want to say pity. It's not that. It's not that you don't feel for the person. It's not that you don't respect them. It's not that you don't respect the situation as serious. But at the same time, it's like eventually, you know, someone comes out of the bathroom without their pants on, and it's like it's a comedic situation. It's like, you know, I know this is a bad. It's like this is evidence of a bad thing going on in someone's mind, but at the same time, a man walking out of the bathroom with his pants off is funny. It's like
absolutely comedy 101.
Like, I know, it's comedy 101. It's like we're having a Marx Brothers moment, even though there's something, you know, behind it that's not funny. It's like it gives you I don't know. It just it's one of those cognitive dissonance. You know, it's like I feel this about this person, I feel this about the situation, but at the same time, a man in boxers walking out saying, well, "I'm ready to go" is funny. So.
You know,
Anyway.
Once Ward gets involved in the dialogue in this play, he really does become engaged and become part of that solution. And as I looked at those interactions in the middle and towards the end,
Yeah.
is there kind of a message that you want to send people, a deeper meaning you'd like them to draw from the experiences of Ward, June, Theo, and Betty?
Okay. There are a lot of deeper meanings, but I don't want to tell people what they are, because if I tell them what they are, I won't be pleasantly surprised with what they come up with. That's one of the things about writing that I love is you spend a lot of time developing characters. You have plots, you have dialogue, you have all this stuff, and you put all this stuff into it, and you write it, and you publish it, and you put it out, and eventually you'll have this situation where someone comes up and is like, "I read your play." I was like, "Oh, what'd you think?" "I loved it," and then they'll go into a little bit of detail saying, "I loved how this symbolized that," or "I love how this it reminded me of this situation with my own family," and they'll tell you a story, and they'll, after I mean, as an author, it's fun to sit down and listen to them tell the story, and then you kind of look at them and it's like, wow, that's a beautiful story. I had no idea anybody would ever, that I didn't write that. You brought that to the play. You brought that interpretation to the play. And it's beautiful, and it works, and it's entirely accidental on my part. So it's kind of like you get to see a person realize, wow, I took something that you didn't mean from something that you kind of get them to see them have a glimpse of what it is to write their own version, you know, or choose their own adventure. And that is a beautiful moment sometimes, and it's fun to see it happen. I think I've only seen it kind of happen twice in my life, but then again, I don't have like readership like Stephen King or J.D. Robb or anything. But I'm sorry, Nora Roberts is who it is. But it's one of those when people come and they tell you something that you didn't even put on the page, you didn't see on the page, or you didn't realize was there, or there's a subtext you didn't think about. And they bring it back, and it's like, oh, that's poignant, man. I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd done that on purpose. You know, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Do you feel like being a playwright instead of a writer is going to be part of that, because these people are seeing something in front of their eyes and they're immersed and they're experiencing it?
Well, first of all, a playwright is a writer.
Well, I mean, like as opposed to a novelist or a book author, in other words.
Well, I've written one novel, so.
Well, I mean, you made a distinction earlier in our interview that the way you felt about writing plays was different than being a traditional author who just cranks out books, but also does plays. So I guess what I'm getting at here is when you say that someone comes through with an interesting interpretation, it sounds like a person sitting in a room watching other people act out this story. is going to be more open to that than a person who's isolated looking at words on a page and it's all taking place in their head. Do you feel that
Yeah,
that happens, or?
I do feel, and I have an appreciation for playwriting and being a novelist. I just the distinction. I don't know. It's like switching from a manual to an automatic on or something like that. It's not that authors are always alone in a room, and it's not that playwrights have some sort of advantage over regular authors, novelists and nonfiction writers. But like with plays, you have to have everything happen in a set space in a set amount of time. You cannot go on about the ship or the whale or the giant squid. You can't really spend paragraphs talking about the atmosphere. It's dialogue, problem, solution, character. It's very stripped bare. It's kind of like it's kind of like journalism is the same way. It's like I can't really I have 15 inches. I can't go into a page long monologue about anything going on. I have to get down who, what, when, where, why, how, and what matters. What matters. And it's with plays, particularly the thing about plays is you have to think about plays in terms of various audiences. First of all, as a writer, a playwright, you have to think about, okay, I have to write this for a producer. It has to be small cast, small set. It has to be easy, cheap. It has to be something that you can perform anywhere. And then after that, you have to think about directors. Okay, it's got to be interesting. It's got to be now with it, hip. And then you have to think about actors. Okay, would I want to play this part? And that's really hard because there are right now I'm adapting Shakespeare, and it's like Shakespeare wrote parts. It's like, who the hell wanted to play that one line guy, and it's like you have to make it so that all the parts are played by all the characters are interesting. They at least have some sort of swan song, some sort of moment where they are in control of the play, and then just going through that, and then finally the last people you think about, and it's I don't want to say that the last people because they're less important than the others, but the last register you think about is the audience, and it's like you have to kind of write the play for, okay, all these gates. You have to pass through all these gates before you have a good play, and that's the thing about playwriting that you don't really get with novels. With novels, you write it, you get maybe beta readers, editor, and a publisher, and I mean you do have gates, but with playwriting, it always has to be quick, succinct, and it has to have something that resonates for everybody right away. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what advice would you give someone who wanted to put on a performance of June Cleaver?
That's a good question. I guess my first advice is my first advice is to have actors can get a laugh in a moment. Like, you have to have good comics. You have to have good comics for this play, and you also need to have a costumer who can find wonderful 50s dresses and pearls. Go for nostalgia with this play. Play off of that, and other than that, be Salvador Dali of the 1950s. Just camp up the absurdity. Make it so that you're making fun of the 50s a little bit, because everyone talks about the golden age, the 50s, and it's like the 50s sucked for a lot of people. I mean, seriously, we had segregation, we had We had people who couldn't live as openly gay or openly transgender. We had all these people that, oh, we should go back to the 50s. That was a good time. It's like for you white male, or you Midwest person, but there were a lot of people who were suffering in the 50s, and the reason that the 50s is so good in memory for everybody is because it wasn't talked about. And I'm sorry, the thing about it is, now that we talk about it, yeah, you think the world's a worse place, but at least we're talking about this because it needs to be addressed. There were people who were unhappy through a lot of history just because we didn't talk about them. We have pretended they didn't exist. And that is the worst thing I think you can do to a person, is pretend they don't exist. And or pretend that what they care about isn't important. And so with that in mind, I think the best thing is to, look at the 50s and be like, yeah, let's talk about how wonderful the 50s were. Let's talk about that perfect family. I want you to have that perfect family, that perfect set, that those perfect dresses, those perfect suits, and just make fun of it. Make fun of it because it's flawed. It has flaw. Tragic flaw, really. That golden age has a tragic flaw. So that's my advice for directors and actors who would approach June Cleaver.
That's fantastic. I love that. That actually ties into one of the other questions I had put together for us, and I just wanted to say that's a fantastic observation, because people are fascinated, but they're fascinated with the idea of that time.
Well, it's the ideal. The ideal. They always. It's one of those things like memory. You always remember the good things. The good things are the things you cling to, but you kind of forget. Okay, there were good things, but there was a lot of tragedy too. Like, think of I can compare it to a relationship. You ever find yourself missing that one person who was the worst person for you? Like, you wake up in the middle of the night, and it's like, this was the only person who ever held me this way, or this is the only person who ever said this in my ear. And that one moment where they were there is the moment I fell in love with them. And that one moment is the thing you miss very, very, very much. But, God, they were such an epic pain in the ass the rest of the time. And that's how I feel about nostalgia. You think about the good things, you think about the past, and you always have rose-colored glasses on. There were some shitty things about every wonderful person you ever met. There are things that your memory just glazes over, saying, you know what, that's not important. I want to remember the good things. And it's the good things are like, I don't know, they're like narcotics. They're like a drug. It's like, I always miss this person because of that. It's like, yeah, but this is also the person who, called you this, or this is also the person who, wrecked your car, or this is also the person who did this to you. It's like you're forgetting all the tragedy, and you're trumping up the goodness. So
it's a very interesting point. My parents they were teenagers in the 50s, and we had a time when they really wanted to go back and watch American Graffiti. Oh, remember, that was so neat with the cars and the things. And if you go back and watch American Graffiti as an adult who's lived through your teenage years, regardless of what decade, you feel like this is kind of an honest portrayal of what it was like to be a teenager at that time.
Yeah.
But then my parents at the same time are just shocked. The language, the situations. And I keep thinking to myself, but you've told me stories when I was older about your years that line up with this. Yes, some people smoked, some people swore, there were teen pregnancies, and there were car crashes. These were things that actually happened that you've forgotten about until American Graffiti brought that back to the surface.
Well, and in that movie, there's one moment in that movie where it's like, oh God, I was that guy, and it's so pitiful. Richard Dreyfuss driving, and he's in the back of the car, and he looks out the window, and there's a girl driving in a car next to them, and she mouths something, and he turns to the guys like, chase that car. What? That woman, that girl, I swear to God, she just said I love you to me. It's like, oh God, you poor pathetic man. No, I don't know what she said, but it wasn't that, And it
Perhaps
was
the
just,
rose-colored glasses were on at
yeah,
the time too.
yeah, exactly. So it's like that's the moment when you're a teenager, you believe in happily ever after, you believe in kismet, you believe in meet cutes and all that, and it doesn't quite work out that way most of the time. So yeah, I mean, it does eventually work out that way sometimes, but and it's wonderful when it does. But I'd hate to be a pessimist and say go in with both feet on the ground and your eyes open.
So what was your favorite scene in June Cleaver, Sexual Deviant?
Echo effect, echo effect, echo effect. The first scene I wrote was the argument with June and Ward about buy a cow, free milk, that stuff. The one that I think has kind of stuck with me is the scene where she is in front of the Joe McCarthy character and being sentenced, because that was one of those, that's kind of the climax of the play, really. And it's like that situation felt like what American culture has, I don't want to say it's what it's become, but that seems to be what happens a lot, is you need to behave this way, you need to do this. And basically it's where an authority figure, not necessarily the government, but an authority figure comes in and be like, okay, stop this foolishness. It's time to grow up. It's time to be professional. It's time to teach the right lessons and do the right thing. That moment is a very American moment for me. That moment where it's like, okay, stop being a hippie, cut your hair, get a job. And yeah, that was a scene that was both difficult to write, and when I wrote it after I put down the pen, I wrote it originally on legal pads. I kind of looked at it and I was like, oh God, I'm a bastard for writing the scene. But it's also one of those, like Edward Albee, he always said the greatest thing you can do as a writer is to hold up a mirror to the audience, to America, or in my case, America for this play. Hold up a mirror and say, take a good long look, guys. Something's wrong here. This is a bad moment. This is horrible. Because you're shunting a person's individuality, someone's originality, someone's weirdness, in order to make him fit into this cookie cutter American idea. And the conflict in America for me is the difference between what an individual is. We love individuality in America, but we also want cookie cutter homes, cookie cutter housewives. Every driver has a car. And we have this idea of what it is to be a successful American. And that's not individual. That's mass produced. That's cellophane wrapped and packaged at the local supermarket. And it's just this, again, cognitive dissonance. There's this friction between those two ideas. I think that June Cleaver in the play, the thing I like about her is like, okay, I had to go through that. I had to go through this being a housewife. But she looks at Theo as like, you don't. You can choose to be that weirdo that I wanted to be 50 years ago. And I don't want you to just throw it away. Take the time. Think about it.
It is interesting how McCarthy seems to serve as a reality check on that 50s nostalgia, but at the same time, you're right. There's a nice generational segue there where clearly while she's speaking on the one hand in traditional sense of, yes, we'll call the doctor, I'll take care of it, dear. And on the other, she's saying, this is what happened to me and I got stuck and this is why I'm a housewife in a sitcom. But you, like you say, there's more.
You could be Murphy Brown,
Exactly.
You could be anything you want to be. And that's another thing about female roles. Like, I watch the news. I read a lot of news. And we're kind of going, I think, finally, I hope, through a revolution where it's like more women in the writing rooms, more women on TV, more women who are not June Cleaver. We need women of color, women of other orientations. We need people who are transgender on TV. Getting families who aren't just the Huxtables. We need Blackish. We need Mixedish. We need Fresh Off the Boat. I'm seeing the beginnings, I hope, of a renaissance where it's not just white guys writing stuff. I say that, of course, being a white guy who wrote stuff. I don't view writers of color, I don't view women writers as competition. It's like, oh, thank God, finally, these people are in the conversation. Can I talk to these people? Can I work with these people? Because I have been this is one of the things as a writer I always think about is like, I don't want to write something that'll offend somebody on accident. I don't want to write something that'll offend people on accident. If I want to offend you, I'll do it on purpose. I'm happy to do that. But it's one of those, like, I'd love the idea of just sitting down with a room full of people who, the only thing we have in common is that we're writers. I'd love Indian women, black men, gay, lesbian, trans, just sit down and be like, okay, now is the time where we look at each other and is like, what can we joke about together? What is funny? Open the doors, let them in, let everyone in, and have fun with it. Because that's the way that you get over this whole, we can't talk about that shit. We can't talk about it. It's like, no, you can talk about it. Just grow a set, sit down in a room with people and say, we're talking about this, and it's going to be funny at the end. God damn it. Lock the doors.
The specter of McCarthy is no longer the bugaboo that he was.
Oh, yeah. And that's just it. It's like, there's not going to be someone who comes in and wags a finger, is like, you can't talk about this in America, or you can't do this. You're not going to have Richard Nixon come in and be like, nah, blah, blah, blah. You have to look at him and be like, oh, fuck off, you old dead white guy. Let's have fun.
Well, I definitely love this conversation, but I do want to say, Ben, thanks so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it. And
thank you. It's fun to do.
For those who have missed it, the book June Claver, Sexual Deviant is a play script you can find on Amazon, and the audiobook is on Audible.
And I encourage you all to not just read it, but if you can find a stage that's willing to stage it, put it on. Hell, tell me that you're putting it on. I might come and see it.
That's great advice.
Thank you, Trenton. Have a good night.
Thanks, Ben.
Have a good day.
Too. Take care.